Friends, we have had a view of America in the 1930s and before, and the conditions were indeed difficult, and the writers didn't know what to say about the society in which they were living, and their job initially, essentially also, is to, and at that time also it was, to entertain the audience, to give them a sense of happiness, sense of pleasure, and art has to be retained in its essential form. And yet, in the 1930s, it was difficult to create what can be called a sense of happiness, and the broken family, the dreaming aspect, the aspect that shows more of a spectrum of violence that is inside, that is disturbing the people, all that may be seen in the play. And for this we have, as you know, Professor Bajaj, who will be now taking the play, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, and she'll, through the discussion on this, tell us about what was happening at the level of minds in America at that time. So I request you to begin your analysis of the play that we have to discuss.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So, I'll begin with this particular quotation from Leo Huberman's book, and it is on the Great Depression of 1929 that we have been discussing. Historically, we've had a kind of a view. Now, I want to pick up this and then try to look in what way can we see, and in what way do we see projections in the Glass Menagerie that relate to this kind of a discussion. So, Leo Huberman, in his book We the People, The Drama of America, describes the Great Depression in the following manner. I quote, "The level of economic activity reached its peak about 1929. It fell at an unprecedented rate and to an unprecedented extent from 1929 to 1932. In no other country was the collapse so great, because in no other country had the expansion been so rapid and so spectacular. And with the collapse came disillusionment and suffering." He continues, "The America of 1932 was a vastly different place from the America of 1929. The hopes of the post-war decade had received a shattering blow. The high priests of private enterprise had become a public laughingstock. Where were the high wages, the chicken in every pot and the car in every garage of which they had boasted? The American dream of a never-ending and growing prosperity had become an exploded myth." Unquote. Now, this is in a way, this is what defines this moment of 1929 up to 1932. As to how the American dream that was supposed to be a picture. You see, there was this picture that was parcel to people that, we are the great nation and it's going to be unending progress from now on. And that prosperity never ending, and that freedom for all. And the idea that there'll be a beautiful house for everybody, and a lawn and a garage and a beautiful car. In fact, if you would, I would ask you all to go and just Google the American dream, and you will find some pictures, very interesting pictures. There'd be a beautiful villa and a green space, a beautiful blue car out there, and enough food, a lot of children, a happy family picture. So this is what American dream really stood for, a happy family picture, and one that was ever seeing prosperity. So this was the ideal that was being parceled to people by the government of the day and by the rich. And this dream, in a way, shattered. Every section of United States was in distress after, in the 1930s, that is, right? That is the play's setting, the Glass Menagerie. There were workers, farmers, the professional people. They saw unemployment and starvation, and these were the biggest challenges that they had to face. Think of the epigraph that Williams uses for the play from E. Cummings' phrase, and it says, "Nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands." Unquote. What does it even mean? That nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands? referring to the people of America at the time, who were literally clinging on to whatever little they had and making their living on the basic, and this kind of subsistence. So as we know that, the Wingfield family is living in a place that is nothing more than a slum, and they're surrounded by garbage bins, they're surrounded by garbage cans and by cloth lines all over, and there are other fire escapes. It's a dingy place, and the scene created is one we know of a worn out sort of a place. And think of the people in the house. Again, as I mentioned, they cannot pay their bills on time. Amanda is selling subscriptions of women magazines on the telephone to these women because she must make some money out of it. Laura has already been thrown out of the bourgeois industry because she cannot keep up with the speed. Very interestingly, the capitalist system is based on seeing workers as in fact secondary to the machine. In fact, Woodrow Wilson in one of his speech mentioned that men have become cheap and the machine has become dear. So the idea that machinery and property is first and human life is secondary is something that he said in one of his speeches. And the idea that workers were supposed to work rapidly and do the same activity. Now think of Laura. Why did Laura drop out? Why did Laura never go back to the typing school, the business school that she joined? They took a speed test, speed within quotes, right? They took a speed test and she did not pass that test. So it is all about speed. If the workers cannot do their work in the given time with that required speed, then they're ousted. So Laura has already been ousted from that job market, and Tom can barely make do with his job as a shoemaker, and not as a shoemaker but as a salesman at a shoemaker's store. And he despises the inequality that the service industry creates. He says that there is an inherent inequity in the service economy as well, where he's supposed to work in the hierarchical system. And he says, and I quote from the text, he says, "I'd rather somebody picked up a crowbar and battered out my brains than go back mornings." And unquote. So this is how violent, psychological violence that we speak of. We can see it in the play already. Tom doesn't want to go to this job that creates and fosters social inequity, and he would rather have somebody violently kill him than go back in the mornings, and yet he does, because he hears his mother say rise and shine, who's again living in another era, another time that she belonged to, and she can't come to terms with the new reality of the 1930s. So Amanda is living in in the world of the southern world of Mississippi, where there were planters who wanted to marry her, and she almost thought she would marry a rich planter, have servants in the on the estate, and live happily ever. But she chose a telecom man who ran away and left her behind to deal with the circumstances and deal with bring up the children. Tom, again, like his father, actually escapes. Interestingly, both Tom and the father can find ways of escaping, not the women. The fire escape is only available in that sense to Tom or to the father whose picture keeps hanging in the living room. But it is not something that is available to either Amanda or Laura. And particularly not Laura, who's as fragile as the glass menagerie she maintains in the house. She is unable to cope with this kind of mechanized living. She's unable to cope with the speed of this bourgeois life and the speed of the capitalist world that it demands. In fact, when I thought of the speed test that she did not pass, I was reminded of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, and there just this, it's the speed that the person cannot keep up with, so much so that he's thrown in the machine and battered. So that kind of violence is what I think here even Tennessee Williams wants to highlight by projecting the lives of these people. There is social unrest that was sweeping through the country in the 1930s in America, right? And Tom, right in the beginning, as he opens the play, he makes that comment. He says, and I quote, "In Spain there was revolution. Here there was only confusion. In Spain there was Guernica. Here there were disturbances of labor, sometimes pretty violent, in otherwise peaceful cities of Chicago, Cleveland and St. Louis." This is the social background of the play. So even though the play is not political, even though the play is about this family that is breaking apart, that it's the tragedy of the family, it's about the insecurity of the family, it's about the disillusionment of the family, and nothing really more. But the moment the narrator of this play, Tom, who's also a character in this play, tells us that this is the social backdrop of the play. On one hand, in Europe, in Spain, you have the revolution, right, where there is a civil war. Here, there is only confusion. People are unable to make sense of it. In a way, suggesting that America was actually on the verge of a revolution at the time of the Great Depression, but that revolution did not occur. It in fact led to confusion because because of the policies, because of the way it was handled, because the social unrest was so much that what happened in Spain was the possibility of it happening in America was very, very close, but it did not. That revolution did not occur. In its place, there was confusion, and people were blind. People were blindly being brought out of the education system and made to follow a system that they felt completely isolated from and alienated from. And there were these disturbances of labor. In fact, if you go on to see, you will find there have been so many strikes and so many labor movements that have taken place from the 1880s onwards in America till the 1930s and 40s, and in fact it continues. If you go into, say, the Ginsburg era and others, you find that there is a kind of a complete breaking apart that takes place as decades unfold. So the social backdrop of this play is this. But if we didn't know that if Tom didn't say that this is the social backdrop of the play could have been read at a more superficial level and could have nothing to do with the American dream and the bubble that was created by it. So Tom, in fact, himself consoles himself by going to the movies every day, by escaping the daunting reality of the Depression that has destroyed that dream for his generation. So it's in a way an angered, disgruntled, but also a frustrated generation that doesn't know where to go. So he constantly goes to the movies and he wants to escape it. In fact, the music that constantly comes in, as backdrop of this play, one of the music, dance music, is actually titled "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise." And there is a sense that the world is waiting for the sunrise. It's almost like waiting for Godot kind of a situation. Yeah, that the sunrise will never take place. So there is a sense of hopelessness that is attached to this kind of a scene. And Amanda is the only one who is actually waiting for the sunrise. When she says "rise and shine," she expects Tom to be doing great things. She expects much of Laura, but she is very well aware of the fact that it's not the world that she inhabited. It's not the past that she lives in, and so for her the escape is her past. She constantly goes back into the past and talks about the 17 gentlemen callers who came in and tried to woo her and win her in marriage. So Amanda is finding her escape route in the past. Tom literally just leaves the house as his father did and leaves both of them to fend for themselves, and Laura, as we know, finds her escape in this imagination. So it's interesting that imagination is in fact very important for all these characters, including the playwright Tennessee Williams. Amanda is imaginatively recreating a past for herself. Laura is going in the imagination and becoming a part of the glass menagerie. The unicorn in a way is a kind of an analogy used for Laura. That Laura is in fact that unicorn and a kind of a freak, as she says, among horses, very not like them, and yet so fragile and vulnerable and beautiful at the same time. So there is a kind of poetry around Laura and the glass menagerie, and they are inseparable almost, the two of them. But she lives in them. She lives with them. In the scene when Jim says, "What have you been doing in the last 6 years if you dropped out of school and did nothing?" She says, "Don't think I didn't do anything. I was managing my glass menagerie. They require a lot of care and they're very vulnerable and fragile, and so I need to be with them." So there is a sense of course, there is a kind of a cracking apart. A normal person would not want to do that. Human beings are meant to work with their hands. They're meant to enjoy work. They're meant to enjoy a company. Human beings are social by nature. But why is it that Laura is unable to cope with this? Why is it that she's not able to join society as others would? Why is she not as optimistic? Of course, there is a kind of a crack in this kind of psyche in these characters, that psychologically they are not in the right place, Amanda, Laura, or Tom for that matter. Tom, in fact, more literally is the poet. He keeps writing poems on, shoe boxes, and he's in fact fired from his job because he did precisely that. So he's a poet who's exercising his imagination and is also writing this play now for us. So imagination in a way becomes the escape route for these characters who otherwise are unable to bond at a more social level. They're unable to use their work or their effort in the place that they would like.
What is the significance of the title Glass Menagerie, and what does the writer want to convey through it? Why should he call it Glass Menagerie?
So you see, the menagerie in many ways would be a collection of interestingly, the menagerie would be an exhibition of wild animals put together, right? Now, for us, these are the wild animals on stage, right, who are on exhibition, really speaking. And each one, so more precisely, it is Laura who is an extension of that glass menagerie, because she's close to it and she thinks that she's a part of it. But really speaking, they all seem to be living in their own illusion. Amanda says that, Tom, you are living in a manufactured illusion. You think you can escape it. You think you are living a life of drudgery, but you don't understand it. You are living in a life of illusion. It's interesting that when Amanda forces Tom, she says at one point that you're jeopardizing our security, you're jeopardizing our lives by behaving in this manner. And he says, no, I want to become a poet and I want to leave and I want to go places. And she says that you are living in your manufactured illusions. These are her exact words. For Tom, Amanda is living in her illusion. And both Amanda and Tom, illusion of her past that she can't come out of. It's almost like she's frozen in that past, in that glass menagerie of the past, which she's trying to bring alive, which doesn't exist. And for both Amanda and Tom, they know that Laura is a gone case in many ways. That she is.
What does illusion signify in the play? Does the writer want to emphasize the context of illusion in the play through the title?
So both things. In one way, characters' illusion, and illusion brings us close to deception. What I said, that people have been deceived and have been made to live in an illusion, and that illusion has led to disillusionment. Then, right? So the idea of disillusionment comes from first nurturing an illusion, a dream, a myth that you believe in, a national myth that all of them believed in. So at the level of characters, they all believed in the national myth of that American progress and dream, which got shattered, and this is the reality that they have to face. But illusion is also very important for the playwright, that is Tennessee Williams. He believes that in order to be able to speak about reality in a more authentic way and to be able to transfer the vitality of life, you need an illusion.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Please explain.
So,
it.
according to him, that illusion is that the writer creates by transforming characters, by transforming the real life into something else, is a way of tapping into the kind of a collective consciousness of the people, or you could say the unconscious, or in many ways tapping into the inner layers of life, or the complexity of inner life. For Tennessee Williams, the inner life of the character is very important, because it is this inner life that gives a kind of perspective to what life is. Otherwise, life is boredom and monotony. But it is through these symbolisms, through these perspective that the character's inner being gives, this kind of perspective that the inner being gives. It is through this that reality means something to people.
Can illusion also be a kind of comment on life? In the sense, that the writer is creating an illusion, the people also live under an illusion, and then they create an alternative world in their minds, and that the gap between the illusion and the reality, that becomes a comment, that things are not happening according to what you wish.
Yes, it is true, but I don't think so. Yeah, that is the regular sort of interpretation regarding escapism also, that you escape the world in literature, you escape the reality, because reality is daunting, because the trauma of the Great Depression is too much to bear. And so Tom also goes into writing poetry, and he's a poet. So that is of course there. But I think more than that, what Tennessee Williams is trying to suggest is that when one creates an illusion of reality, one is able to see the reality, aspects of reality better. That in that illusion there are things that connect, that one can exaggerate, and in exaggeration the meaning somehow is driven home. That may not be possible in reality. If one were to give a, and so he calls it a kind of a plastic theatre. He says that I don't believe in realistic theatre. He says expressionism, impressionism and all symbolic art, the purpose of them is not to escape reality. Their purpose is to bring the point closer to reality, to bring and understand, to bring the reader closer to reality. It's interesting. We somehow seem to think that impressionism and expressionism are areas through which you actually escape reality. You create symbols, you don't want to be realistic, so you are escaping reality. Tennessee Williams suggests that it is in fact through impressionism and the likes you actually approach reality better. You come closer to reality through them and not through realistic depictions.
Comment on the glass menagerie in the light of what you have said, because that's very interesting. That when you look at the glass menagerie, then actually you are thinking about the actual conditions in life.
Yes, that is true. So, at some place he says, towards the end, when the play is closing, Tom, addresses his guilt that he left both Amanda and Laura in the lurch, and he went and pursued. He thought he would escape it, and he said that I thought that I didn't mean to think about you, Laura, so much as I did, and that every time I see some glass objects, I see these small glass bottles with broken rainbow kind of bottles, as if there are fragmented rainbows. I think of you. So in a way, these are all characters, who are coming to terms with the trauma of the Great Depression, and it is their own broken stories and the broken rainbows that they carry. So there is poetry in all of them. You see, even Amanda, it's very interesting if you just see the character portrayal, the way characterization is done, or as the playwright suggests Amanda should be. He says Amanda should be silly but at the same time admirable. There should be poetry in her. There should be she's cruel because she's forcing a point, but she's not really cruel. So in each character there is poetry and dream and this kind of a bit of a rainbow, as Tom says, a broken rainbow.
That which is something lacking in life, actually.
That which is poetry is there in human beings. Human beings are essentially poetic beings. They are happy people. They want to create. They want to enjoy. They want to live together and live in a community. So it is that, and they want to create, and they enjoy creating. So I think that is where poetry is, in the human effort. So, but the human effort gone awry, human effort that does not find fulfillment, that is in fact made to recoil from reality. Like Laura decides to not go back to the business school because she can't pass the speed test of the typewriter, because she can't keep pace with the society that wants her to keep pace at a particular speed, and she does not have that speed. So the fact that there is poetry in each person, and each person is that glass menagerie, which is, or that glass animal that is wild and beautiful in its own way, and yet fragile and vulnerable.
Will you briefly tell us whether this play is realistic in nature?
Actually, this play is a memory play. And that's what we are told right in the beginning, that it is a memory play. Now, being a memory play, it is obviously not realistic, because memory is a take on reality. Memory is nostalgia, but in memory you color things in many ways. In memory, things get tweaked. As experience grows, your memory is not the same. So memory is not a stagnant thing in your mind. It keeps altering, changing, and changing its color. So there is nostalgia, but memory is also illusion. It's the illusion of a past, and it is a past that you keep returning to. So just as Amanda keeps returning to a past of the plantation life and of the agricultural expansion, or what the life that she saw, Tom also actually is present in the present when the play is actually taking place, and in the future, which means the present becomes the past. You see, he is talking, the play begins from the time when Tom is looking back at his own memory, and he is trying to rephrase his memory and recount the tale of Amanda and Laura as it exists in his memory. And he's the narrator.
Can memory also be called history?
Memory is yes, memory is a kind of a personal anecdote, and in that sense an alternate history. But of course it is subjective to the person telling the tale, like it is Tom's memory, it is Tom's history of Amanda and Laura. What if it was Laura's memory? What if Laura was the narrator of the play? Would the play change then? And how would that play change? So it is, in many ways, I feel memory is by definition subjective and personal, and obviously then emotive also. That there is a very deep level of sense perception and emotion that is attached to it. So I wouldn't say that this play, Tennessee Williams is not trying to make a realistic play. He's trying to create a kind of and memory is an impression, isn't it? It's an impression of a past life as you remember it. So it's very close to Impressionism, and trying to capture where pictures become alive and pictures speak. So memory in that sense is very close to that kind of illusion, imagination and nostalgia, and it captures then a period in America when things were in complete disarray. So I think there is this idea of fragility and vulnerability that is very strongly present in the play, and particularly in the case of Laura, it is because of her deformed foot and that she's a cripple. That also gets added. It's literally being shown in this case. In fact, Tennessee Williams wrote a short story titled "Portrait of a Girl in Glass" in 1941. Think of this title, "Portrait of a Girl in Glass." Yeah, in 1941, which is actually the base for the story that he took up for the play, The Glass Menagerie, and converted Laura. In the story, of course, the girl has more, is psychologically dealing with issues, while Laura is, has a foot that is deformed. So I think the idea of entrapment, the idea of fragility, again, entrapment and escape, these are ways in which he's trying to look at, so that people are entrapped in this social system, and so this kind of psychological and social violence that they face in the event is what I think is at the center of this play.
Friends, we have had a good discussion about the play from Professor Bajaj, and the play is multifarious in its aspects. It makes lots of points, and it is still rooted in the 1930s of America. So this is what comes out in this discussion, and I'm sure you have many more points in your mind, raising their head, so that the discussion continues about the America of the 1930s and the way it later on manifested in so many different ways. So we had a discussion that will keep haunting us for the points that are made here. Thank you, Professor Bajaj, and thanks, friends, and please go over it in your mind so that you understand the play still better. Thanks.